Staff Sergeant Webb thought he was hunting for infiltrators among the 800 personnel at Forward Operating Base Apache. But when the base-wide security screening began, he discovered something that shattered everything he believed about trust, loyalty, and the nature of human deception. The enemy wasn't hiding among them. The enemy had been created from within, and the truth would cost Webb everything he thought he knew about his fellow soldiers. The security lockdown began at 0600 hours on October 29, 2019. Every person on Forward Operating Base Apache was required to report to designated screening areas where military intelligence specialists would conduct comprehensive background checks, psychological evaluations, and polygraph examinations. Colonel Martinez had authorized the most extensive counterintelligence operation ever conducted at an active forward operating base, determined to identify the infiltrators who had demonstrated impossible technological capabilities. Staff Sergeant Marcus Webb watched the screening process with growing unease. He'd expected to find evidence of foreign agents or advanced enemy technology, but what emerged during the interrogations challenged everything he thought he understood about the nature of infiltration and betrayal. The first breakthrough came when Specialist Park was subjected to enhanced interrogation techniques typically reserved for captured enemy combatants. Park, the computer specialist who had first reported the impossible system intrusions, broke down after 6 hours of questioning and revealed information that sent shockwaves through the investigation team. The computer intrusions weren't external attacks, Park sobbed, her composure completely shattered. I was instructed to create the appearance of external intrusion while actually implementing pre-programmed system modifications designed to simulate impossible technological capabilities. Major Kim, who was conducting the interrogation, leaned forward with intense interest. Who instructed you to create these false intrusions, Specialist? Park's response would reshape the entire investigation and reveal the true scope of what had been happening at FOB Apache. Project Mindbridge, she whispered. It's a classified psychological warfare research program. We were told we were testing new counterintelligence techniques, but the real objective was studying how military personnel respond when their understanding of reality becomes unreliable. Webb felt his blood freeze as he listened to Park's confession through the monitoring system. Project Mindbridge wasn't a foreign intelligence operation. It was an American military research program that had been using the personnel at FOB Apache as unwitting test subjects in psychological experiments. Major Kim continued the interrogation with questions that revealed the horrifying scope of the deception. How many personnel at this base are involved in Project Mindbridge? Park's voice was barely audible. Approximately 40 individuals across all departments. We were recruited separately and told we were participating in counterintelligence training designed to identify potential security breaches. None of us understood that we were actually implementing a comprehensive psychological warfare operation against our own unit. Webb realized that nearly 5% of the base's personnel had been secretly recruited into a program designed to psychologically manipulate their fellow soldiers. The impossible incidents, the advanced technology demonstrations, and the surveillance operations had all been carefully orchestrated to create the impression of supernatural or extraterrestrial activity. As the interrogations continued, more members of the Mindbridge program were identified and broke under questioning. Each revelation added another piece to a puzzle that depicted a conspiracy more disturbing than any enemy infiltration. Sergeant Rodriguez from the motor pool confessed to implementing mechanical modifications that created the appearance of impossible equipment failures while actually using conventional sabotage techniques disguised by sophisticated misdirection. The vehicles weren't actually immobilized by unknown technology, Rodriguez explained. We installed remote-controlled braking systems that could prevent forward movement while maintaining normal engine function. The objective was to create mechanical failures that appeared to violate physical laws while actually using conventional methods. Staff Sergeant Chen from Communications admitted to using advanced signal processing equipment to create the impression that radio transmissions were being modified by unknown technology. The voice modifications were generated using classified audio processing hardware, Chen revealed. We could intercept outgoing transmissions and replace them with modified versions while creating the impression that the modifications were being generated by external forces. Webb began to understand that every impossible incident at FOB Apache had been the result of a sophisticated psychological operation designed to convince the base personnel that they were dealing with threats beyond conventional military understanding. The program was testing how soldiers would respond when their fundamental assumptions about reality were systematically undermined. But the most disturbing revelation came when Webb learned the identity of the operation's commanding officer. The interrogations revealed that Project Mindbridge was being directed by someone Webb had trusted implicitly throughout the investigation. Colonel Martinez herself was the program's operational commander. Webb watched in horror as Martinez was brought into the interrogation room, not as the base commander seeking answers, but as the architect of a psychological warfare program that had used her own soldiers as laboratory subjects. Project Mindbridge is a legitimate military research program authorized at the highest levels of the Department of Defense, Martinez stated calmly when confronted with the evidence. The objective was to study military psychological resilience under conditions of extreme uncertainty and perceived supernatural threat. Major Kim, who had been conducting the interrogations under Martinez's orders, suddenly realized he had been manipulated throughout the entire process. "Colonel Martinez, are you telling us that you authorized psychological experiments on your own personnel without their knowledge or consent?" Martinez's response revealed the cold calculations behind the operation. The research required authentic psychological responses to perceived supernatural threats. Informed consent would have compromised the validity of the psychological data we were collecting. Every individual at this base volunteered for military service, which includes participation in classified research programs designed to enhance military effectiveness. Webb felt his entire worldview collapsing as he realized that the woman he had trusted to investigate the impossible incidents had actually been orchestrating them. Martinez had been studying his investigation, documenting his psychological responses, and using his growing paranoia as research data for a program designed to weaponize uncertainty and fear. The interrogation revealed that Project Mindbridge was part of a larger military research initiative studying the psychological effects of perceived supernatural threats on military effectiveness. The program was designed to develop techniques for psychological warfare that could convince enemy forces they were facing impossible odds, while simultaneously testing how American personnel would maintain operational effectiveness under similar conditions. The incidents you investigated, Staff Sergeant Webb, provided valuable data on how experienced military personnel process and respond to information that challenges their understanding of conventional threats, Martinez explained. Your analytical approach, your growing suspicion of your fellow soldiers, and your attempts to rationalize impossible events have all been documented and will contribute to the development of more effective psychological warfare techniques. Webb realized that his entire investigation had been guided and manipulated by Martinez, who had been feeding him information designed to create specific psychological responses while studying how he processed evidence that seemed to point toward supernatural or extraterrestrial explanations. The thermal surveillance operations you observed were conducted using advanced camouflage technology developed by military research programs, Martinez continued. The personnel conducting the surveillance were special operations soldiers equipped with experimental equipment designed to test the effectiveness of advanced concealment methods against standard military detection systems. Every piece of evidence Webb had collected, every impossible incident he had documented, and every conclusion he had reached had been the result of carefully orchestrated psychological manipulation designed to study his responses to manufactured mystery. But the most disturbing revelation was yet to come. As the interrogation continued, Webb learned that he hadn't been selected randomly as the investigation's focal point. He had been specifically chosen for the psychological profile he represented and the responses he was likely to generate. Staff Sergeant Webb was identified as an ideal subject for this research because of his analytical capabilities, his attention to detail, and his psychological tendency to seek rational explanations for unusual events, Martinez explained. His background in logistics coordination made him particularly valuable for studying how military personnel process complex information while maintaining operational effectiveness. Webb realized that his entire military career, his assignment to FOB Apache, and his role as logistics coordinator had been arranged to position him as the primary subject of a psychological warfare experiment. His colleagues, his daily duties, and his living situation had all been manipulated to create the optimal conditions for studying his psychological responses to manufactured supernatural threats. The personnel who had disappeared weren't victims of alien abduction or supernatural phenomena. They were special operations soldiers who had been rotated out of the base after their roles in the psychological experiment had been completed. The radio transmissions from missing personnel had been generated using voice synthesis technology and transmitted using classified communication equipment. The individuals you believed had been absorbed into an alien collective consciousness were actually participating in the psychological warfare demonstration, Martinez revealed. They were relocated to other assignments after their participation in the research program was complete. Webb felt his sanity fragmenting as he realized that literally everything he had experienced over the past month had been designed to manipulate his psychological state while collecting data on his responses. The investigation that had consumed his life, the growing paranoia that had poisoned his relationships with his colleagues, and the fear that had driven him to question his own perceptions had all been the intended products of a carefully designed psychological warfare program. But Martinez wasn't finished. The final revelation would destroy Webb's ability to trust his own memories and perceptions. Staff Sergeant Webb, the psychological modifications you've experienced during your participation in Project Mindbridge include selective memory enhancement and suppression techniques designed to intensify your emotional responses to the manufactured phenomena, Martinez explained. Your memories of certain events have been chemically enhanced to increase their psychological impact, while other memories have been suppressed to prevent you from recognizing the artificial nature of your experiences. Webb realized that his own memories, the foundation of his identity, and his understanding of recent events, had been chemically altered to serve the research objectives of Project Mindbridge. He could no longer distinguish between authentic experiences and artificially enhanced psychological impressions created by military mind control techniques. The room began spinning as Webb grappled with the realization that not only had his investigation been manipulated, but his memories and perceptions had been chemically altered to prevent him from recognizing the manipulation. Everything he thought he knew about the past month, about his colleagues, and about his own psychological state had been artificially constructed using classified psychological warfare techniques. The purpose of Project Mindbridge extends beyond studying responses to perceived supernatural threats, Martinez continued. We are developing techniques for controlling military personnel through psychological manipulation that bypasses conscious awareness. Your participation has provided valuable data on how to convince soldiers that their reality has been altered while maintaining their operational effectiveness. Webb understood that he had been transformed into a weapon without his knowledge or consent. The psychological modifications made to his mind would allow military controllers to manipulate his perceptions and responses while maintaining his belief that he was acting independently. He had become a prototype for psychologically controlled soldiers who could be directed through manufactured experiences while remaining unaware of their manipulation. Major Kim, who had been conducting the interrogations under the assumption that he was hunting for enemy agents, finally grasped the true scope of what Project Mindbridge represented. Colonel Martinez, you're describing a program that violates every principle of military ethics and human rights, Kim protested. You've conducted illegal human experimentation on American soldiers without their knowledge or consent. Martinez's response revealed the institutional support behind the psychological warfare program. Project Mindbridge operates under presidential authorization with oversight from the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the Director of National Intelligence. The techniques we are developing are essential for maintaining American military superiority in conflicts where psychological warfare will determine victory or defeat. Webb realized that Martinez wasn't a rogue officer conducting unauthorized experiments, but the operational commander of a legitimate military program that had received approval from the highest levels of government. The psychological warfare techniques being tested at FOB Apache were intended for deployment against both enemy forces and American military personnel who required enhanced control and direction. As the interrogation concluded, Webb found himself in a position where he could no longer trust his memories, his perceptions, or his understanding of reality itself. The psychological modifications implemented through Project Mindbridge had left him unable to distinguish between authentic experiences and artificially manufactured psychological impressions. Martinez approached Webb with a final revelation that would determine his fate. Staff Sergeant Webb, your participation in Project Mindbridge is complete, and the data you've provided has exceeded our research objectives. However, your knowledge of the program's methods and objectives represents a security risk that must be addressed. Webb understood that Martinez was offering him two choices: voluntary participation in additional psychological modifications that would suppress his memories of Project Mindbridge, or permanent reassignment to a classified facility where he would continue serving as a test subject for advanced psychological warfare techniques. The memory suppression techniques will allow you to return to normal military service without conscious recollection of your participation in this research program, Martinez explained. You will retain your military skills and professional capabilities, but your memories of the impossible incidents and their true nature will be replaced with conventional explanations that will not compromise operational security. Webb faced a choice between preserving his memories and losing his freedom, or maintaining his military career while sacrificing his understanding of what had been done to him. Either option would serve the interests of Project Mindbridge while ensuring that the psychological warfare program could continue operating without exposure. In his final log entry, Webb wrote that he had chosen to retain his memories despite the consequences, believing that preserving the truth about psychological warfare programs targeting American soldiers was more important than maintaining his personal freedom or military career. Staff Sergeant Marcus Webb was transferred to a classified research facility in Nevada, where he continues to serve as a test subject for advanced psychological warfare techniques. His official military record indicates that he suffered a psychological breakdown while investigating security breaches at FOB Apache and was medically retired from active duty. Forward Operating Base. Apache returned to normal operations after Project Mindbridge concluded its research phase. The personnel who had participated in the psychological warfare demonstrations were reassigned to other units with no official record of their involvement in the program. Colonel Martinez was promoted to Brigadier General and assigned to command the Department of Defense's Psychological Warfare Research Division, where she oversees multiple programs similar to Project Mindbridge at military installations around the world. The techniques developed through Project Mindbridge have been classified at the highest levels of government secrecy, but defense analysts believe they are being deployed in psychological warfare operations, targeting both enemy forces and American military personnel who require enhanced control and direction. Webb's investigation, which he believed was hunting for enemy infiltrators, had actually documented his own psychological manipulation and provided research data for programs designed to control military personnel through manufactured experiences that bypass conscious awareness. The true enemy at Forward Operating Base Apache had never been foreign agents or advanced technology. The enemy had been the erosion of trust, the manipulation of reality, and the transformation of American soldiers into unwitting subjects of their own government's psychological warfare experiments. And somewhere in a classified facility in Nevada, Staff Sergeant Webb continues to resist psychological modifications while serving as a living reminder that the greatest threats to military personnel may come not from enemy action, but from the institutions they have sworn to serve.